Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Talk to Georgian live chat. My name is Jenny Thompson. I am the social media specialist here at Georgian College. Today, we are going to be talking all about National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is coming up this Sunday, June 21st, which is also the first day of summer. We are celebrating today with this live chat, and immediately following afterwards, we're going to be hosting our Indigenous services, are hosting an awesome free online concert of Indigenous music. That's happening from noon to 1:30 p.m. today. That's going to be over on WebEx, so for sure check out our stories for a link to the concert, and we've got all the access codes in there and everything that you need to join. So today we're going to be talking with Emma Greenfield. She's the Indigenization Specialist Assistant here at Georgian College. So you might be wondering, what does an Indigenization Specialist Assistant do? It's quite a mouthful. What is National Indigenous Peoples Day all about? Can anybody celebrate it? And this online concert you mentioned, intriguing. Tell me more about this. What can we expect from that? So any questions that you might have, please post them below in the comments, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So thank you so much again for everybody who's joining us this morning. So just a note before we get started as well, Sid from our International Center, he will be joining us in the comments and helping answer some of the questions we can't get through today. He's going to be under the International Center's account, which is IC Georgian. And for sure, especially for international students, give them a follow. They post lots of updates and information on their account. As well as they run live chats 3 times a week on Facebook and Instagram. So give them a follow to stay connected with fellow international students. As well, a really great resource is our website, GeorgianCollege.ca. And there's tons and tons of information on there. And I'll just do a quick preview of that. So GeorgianCollege.ca, there's tons of information on there, including some of what we're going to be talking about today. As well, this bright orange bar up at the top, there is information on fall 2020 program delivery information. So for sure, check that out. You can see which of your classes this fall are going to be on campus or remote. As well, this link here has all of our COVID-19 updates. So if you go there, this is the page here, and it's broken down by section. So it makes it really easy to find the info you're looking for. There's also a tab just for international students, which will take you to this page as well. So great. So we are going to get started in just a moment. So again, if you have any comments or questions, please post them down below. We're going to be bringing in Emma Greenfield, who is our Indigenization Specialist Assistant at Georgian College. Okay, awesome. I'm going to bring her in now. She can tell us all about what she does here at Georgian. Hey, Emma.
Hello, nice to see you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So yeah, and your title at Georgian is kind of a tongue twister. So Indigenization Specialist Assistant. So tell us a bit about what you do.
Sure. So I work within Indigenous services at the college. So my job is to infuse Indigenous perspectives, stories, and histories into curriculum throughout the college. So Indigenization is just that. It's kind of about centering Indigenous voices, Indigenous resurgence, but within the institution.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. And so I want to jump into National Indigenous Peoples Day that's coming up this weekend on Sunday. So tell us more about, why is this something that we celebrate?
Sure. So although Indigenous people have been around since time immemorial, this day is actually fairly new. I think it began to emerge in the 90s more officially. So Indigenous people from all over Turtle Island, or North America as it's known today, have diverse cultures, traditions, ceremonies, and languages. So this day is really just a day to celebrate and acknowledge these rich cultures from these diverse nations, from east to west, north to south. It's a day to learn about Indigenous people's contributions to Canadian society and to honor their stories. So in Canada, we celebrate First Nations, Metis, Inuit and Afro-Indigenous people.
Mm, awesome. And what does this day mean to you?
This day means a lot to me. So I'm of mixed European and Indigenous ancestry. So as an Indigenous person, this day means celebrating and acknowledging my ancestors. But also, too, what this day means to me is it's about celebrating and acknowledging the resiliency of Indigenous people. So different Indigenous groups have been gathering together long before European contact. But because of colonization, it's important that non-Indigenous Canadians become more aware of the achievements and contributions of Indigenous people that really have long been left out of the Canadian narrative. So despite this history of colonization, Indigenous people are still here thriving, and we must celebrate that.
Yeah. And so, you sort of answered it there, but I think sometimes, non-Indigenous people are wondering, they might be curious about events or, different celebrations, and they're wondering if they can participate. So is that something that they can participate in?
Absolutely. So Indigenous people celebrate their culture by living it every day. So it's actually really important that non-Indigenous Canadians participate in these celebrations and events because it's an opportunity for them to connect with Indigenous people and perhaps maybe even for the first time. It's expected. It's expected during these celebrations, during these gatherings, that Indigenous people are going to be educating non-Indigenous Canadians on their culture. So absolutely, this day is for non-Indigenous Canadians to acknowledge and celebrate as well.
Yeah. And this year especially is different, obviously, because we're all way more virtual than maybe we have been in the past. So how are some different ways that people can actually celebrate this day if we can't get together in person?
Yeah, so Indigenous people have always been adaptable to modern day circumstances. And so, of course, given the fact that we're social distancing, most of these celebrations that we would be doing in person are being done online. So we have virtual powwows, we have virtual concerts. There's a lot of like educational opportunities, teachable moments that people are putting online that normally we would gather for in person, but it's all being facilitated online. So even just Googling, like very simply just Googling National Indigenous Peoples Day online celebrations, you'll see an array of Indigenous-led initiatives that are all being done online.
Yeah. And tell us too, because some with it being on the summer solstice as well, what is the importance there?
Yeah, so summer solstice, depending on, so we recognize that Indigenous people from all across North America are very diverse in their traditions, languages, and beliefs. So depending on the nation, they might celebrate summer solstice in a different way. But something that is very common is that Indigenous people will look to the natural world as their relatives. So for Anishinaabe, for an example of that is we look, the moon is a grandmother, and similarly the sun is grandfather. So on summer solstice, grandfather sun is the highest in the sky than any of the days of the year, and it's also the longest day. So just depending on the nation, summer solstice will usually involve like ceremony, prayer, feast. It just depends on the nation.
Yeah. And I just want to let people, we're getting lots of questions coming into about international students, flights, all that travel restrictions and what to know about that, online classes, co-ops, fall intake. We hear you. We've got lots of information about that. So I just want to refer everybody quickly just to back to our website. So if you do have some questions about those sorts of things or anything else sort of related to Georgian, you can check out our website, GeorgianCollege.ca. We do have all of our ongoing COVID-19 updates and information on there, so for sure check that out. And for anybody who's just tuning in right now, we are chatting about National Indigenous Peoples Day with Emma Greenfield, who is our Indigenization Specialist Assistant at Georgian College. And for anybody who may have missed some of our questions so far, we are going to be posting this on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So we are everywhere. So check those out after we're done here. Yeah, so that's great. So let's jump back into some questions. So sort of touching on one of your points from earlier as well, about non-Indigenous people being curious about some of these, or wanting to learn more about some of these events. Why is it important for non-Indigenous Canadians to know about the rich history of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people?
That's such an important question. And really, the whole purpose of Indigenization within Georgian College is to make people more aware of this relationship that exists. You might not know it exists between Indigenous people and the Canadian government, or Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, but whether you know it or not, that relationship is actually already there. So it's important to know that we simply would not have Canada as we know it today if it had not been for Indigenous people engaging with what is now the Canadian government through land negotiations, through treaties, through relationship building. So that relationship building is still something that should be encouraged between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people. It's a relationship that already exists now, whether you know it or not, but one that needs to be better. We need to do better in building that relationship and making it more meaningful for both parties.
Yeah, and I think sort of touching on that, doing better and being better. That's certainly something that a lot of people these days are sort of tuning into more with, protests around the world, talking more and more about race and racism. Certainly there's been racism against Indigenous people in Canada. Can you point us to some resources, books or otherwise, of where people can learn more about Indigenous history and that sort of thing?
Yes, I would love to. I actually have 3 books that I wanted to share. The final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada is just a great place to start. So the commission had traveled around Canada gathering the stories of residential school survivors. So residential schools being government funded, usually church run institutions that removed Indigenous children from their homes and move them really far away so that they can get an education that they were promised. But of course, once you learn more about the residential school history and legacy, there was a lot of abuse within these schools. So this final report talks a lot about colonization, but also the effects of colonization on Indigenous people and how Canadians, non-Indigenous Canadians, can contribute to reconciling the relationship. There's also Tanya Talaga's Seven Fallen Feathers. I have so many notes. It's just a really, again, to talk about the history of colonization and the legacy of colonization, but also how it affects Indigenous youth, specifically today. And then if you're a history buff, or not actually, like sometimes it's kind of nice to learn about history in a way that is kind of like, I don't know, like fun and just like more like easier digestible narrative. I would suggest Thomas King's The Inconvenient Indian. He has a really, he just has like a very unique way of going about history in a way that's so easily digestible for anyone that wants to learn more about Indigenous history from an Indigenous perspective. But there's so many resources online. I would say definitely search for Indigenous people. It has to be from a First Nations, Métis, Inuit, or Afro-Indigenous person. That would make the learning experience so much more authentic, rather than learning it from non-Indigenous people, just retelling or telling the story for Indigenous people.
Yeah. And so, sort of circling back to National Indigenous Peoples Day, what are some things that non-Indigenous Canadians as well can do to honor First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people beyond, even just beyond the day as well?
It's such an important question. So I would say, like, number one is for non-Indigenous Canadians to just listen to them, like just seek out their stories. There's so many artists, musicians, authors, scholars, activists, actors, so many First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and Afro-Indigenous people who have been sharing what non-Indigenous Canadians can do to be a part of reconciliation, not just on one day, not just on National Indigenous Peoples Day, but every day. So I think number one would be to listen to Indigenous people, just seek out their stories, seek out their knowledge, and listen with an open mind and an open heart.
Yeah. And I think, and speaking of reaching out as well, I want to share some contacts. So Georgian does have Indigenous services, obviously. So if anyone does want to get some more information about Indigenous services, or get some more resources, or, you know, even stop by one of our resource centers, which we have at different campuses, you can reach out to Kayla McCormick. And this is her email address here, kayla.mccormick GeorgianCollege.ca, and she can hook you up.
She's great.
She is. She's busy with organizing our live concert, which is coming soon. So everybody make sure to stay tuned for that. Again, check our stories. We've got a link to the concert and the access codes there because it is on WebEx. So you'll need those to get in there. So yeah, so and National Indigenous Peoples Day is not actually a statutory holiday in Canada. Can you tell us about why that is, except for, I guess, in Northwest Territories and Yukon?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, you know, this push towards reconciliation and the different conversations that are happening. A lot of things, you know, that are just like absolutely not up for debate. You know, we need to be building better relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. But there are still some things that we're kind of debating, and making National Indigenous Peoples Day a statutory holiday is one of those things. So there are some people that are for the idea and some people that have been quite critical of it. So some people think that having one day designated for Indigenous people might not actually do enough for reconciliation. It might just be, it's just another day off for non-Indigenous Canadians to perhaps not take the time to learn about their relationship with Indigenous people. But some people also believe that it could be a really great starting place. So like having to almost like be put into a position where you're questioning, oh, why is this a day that we are honoring? Why is this a day that we're celebrating? Rather than one that might just be kind of optional if you happen to stumble upon some information about this day. You know, we celebrate Queen Victoria's birthday, for example, so why shouldn't we have a day to celebrate Indigenous people? But there are places where that's happening. Like if there's some workplaces, for example, that if they have Indigenous people staff to let them have that day off. There's celebrations that happen all over Toronto. Obviously, it's very different now with social distancing, but even like the Toronto Zoo on this day would let Indigenous people in for free for the day. So there's ways that we're kind of celebrating it, or people are taking the initiative to, you know, make it more of a day that Indigenous people can actually enjoy and take off and enjoy. So it just depends on your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's great too, you know, in the news recently, you know, residential schools are going to be more ingrained in the curriculum now too, here in Canada in schools. So
yeah, we're talking about things more. We're definitely talking about things more, and a lot of it's starting with the information that we learned from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the residential schools. And actually one of their calls to action is to make it's not a National Indigenous Peoples Day, but it'd be like a national day of recognition or reconciliation in response to the residential schools. So yeah, we're finding very different ways to celebrate, to honor Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And we're just getting a question here as well. Just somebody who's just asking about whether there are different groups of Indigenous people. You know, they're asking, you know, if there's certain areas that they're in more, and are they welcoming to non-Indigenous people from outside of Canada?
Yeah, so there are many different nations. So in the States, it would be very common to use the word tribe, but in the Canadian context, we use the word nation. So Canada has three groups of Indigenous people. I've been more mindful now to add the fourth in, Afro-Indigenous, because that is something that's so important that we start honoring as well. That's a population that has often been left out of not only the Canadian narrative, but also even when we talk about Indigenous people. So we have First Nations, we have Metis, and we have Inuit. And so First Nations are very diverse. So an example of so if you're in Georgian College right now, like on campus, you are on First Nations territory because you're on Anishinaabe territory. So Ontario is largely Anishinaabe, Cree. I'm Mohawk, so I would be considered First Nations. Métis people are descendants of ancestry. They have ancestry connecting them to the Red River. So Métis, sometimes people will, it's like little m Métis will be, it means mixed. So if you identify as Métis, but you're mixed, you might mix First Nations European, you might say Métis, but Métis Nation is a very specific nation. They have their own language, culture, traditions. That's very specific to them. And then Inuit are Indigenous people of Northern Canada. Are Indigenous people welcoming of non-Indigenous people from outside of Canada? I would say, of course, because if you look around at the diversity of people that are here and that have been welcomed since first contact, Indigenous people have always been very welcoming of non-Indigenous people coming from all over, and to make Canada their home. We're just finding ways to build better relationships with one another. I hope that answers.
Yeah, so yeah, and I think you know, non-Indigenous Canadians and newcomers as well can you know, contact that. I'm just going to show that email again as well. So if you do want to get more information, whether you you know, are Canadian or not Canadian, for sure you're more than welcome to reach out to our Indigenous services for more information or just to connect and learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
I was gonna say it's a really great place to start. If many of you are from the Georgian community, to make connections to the Indigenous services there and to learn a little bit more about how you can be involved in building that wonderful relationship that you are already a part of, but just making it more meaningful.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because we do at Georgian events as well. We always start with the land acknowledgement, and I know that you know, often there's the ones that I've been to that have, there's sort of been an extra challenge of, you know, take that, it's not just words, like learn more, even look up you know, I guess there's resources online where you can actually look up sort of where you live and what sort of, like, whose territory that is.
Yeah, and that is so important to know that. So we say Indigenous peoples, we say Indigenous cultures because there's so much diversity within that. Even within one nation, there's going to be different, you know, different language dialects, for example, or different ways of conducting ceremony. So it's always good to seek out whose land you're on and learn about the Indigenous people who you are in a relationship with locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I want to jump into, we're running out of time, and I want to jump into the concert as well because it's so exciting. We're gonna, from noon to 1:30, we're gonna have an awesome event. So tell us more about what people can expect.
Yeah, so I'm so excited. We're having a virtual National Indigenous Peoples Day concert.
We've got one of our artists right in the comments saying hello. So hi.
Oh, yes. Jacoda is in the house. So we'll be hearing them talk a little bit more about, you know, what this day means to Indigenous people, but obviously also performing as well. And we also have Evan Red Sky and I think another musician as well who is joining us. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be so wonderful. So music, more learning, and more being together.
Well, they're backstage right now, he says.
Oh, wonderful.
Awesome.
So
get ready. Exciting. Sound check. So fun. Awesome. Okay. And is there anything else that people should know about a national, about the day or about the event today that you'd like to add before we let people get ready for the show?
Yeah, I really would encourage you. This is really an open space for everyone to come and join in. Indigenous, non-Indigenous, people who are like might not even be in Canada, but are, join from wherever you sit. This is really an opportunity to learn more, to be together, and I encourage everyone to join as many people as possible. We normally
Yeah.
we would be together in person, but it's so nice that we can still be together.
Yeah, more the merrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for all your time today and for answering our questions and chatting, and have a great event.
Thank you so much. Thank you. See you all there.
See you soon.
See you soon.
Take care. Awesome. So thanks again to Emma for joining us today, for answering all our questions. And thank you to all of you for joining us today, taking the time out of your day to learn more about National Indigenous Peoples Day, why it's so important to engage with Indigenous history and cultures. So if you've missed any, oh, you know what? We're getting a quick request from Dakota to join. Why don't we bring him in just for a minute? He's backstage getting ready for the online concert we're having. Hello. Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry, I can't hear you. But there we are backstage, ready to go live in just a few minutes. That's so exciting. The nice setup there. Give him a follow. Dakota Music there, pinned at the bottom of the screen. Give him a follow and tune in. So check out our Instagram stories for the link to the show and all the access codes to join us on WebEx. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Have a great show. So thanks, guys, for joining us again. If you missed any of our chat today, we are going to be posting all of this video on our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channels right after. So for sure, check that out. As well, we're going to be back next week for another live chat on Thursday, June 25th at 1 p.m. And we're going to talk about graduation, convocation, how to celebrate online. So we're going to share all the latest updates with that, as well as some online celebrations that we're going to be having planned, and we're going to have a counselor on as well, just to share, if you're having different feelings about not having a physical grad this year, it's so important to celebrate together, and we really want to do that with you and celebrate your accomplishments. So for sure, tune into that, bring your questions, chat with us, and we're excited to see you then. So in the meantime, stay safe, everybody, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week. Take care, guys.